Good evening, everyone. Thank you all very much for being here. My name is Kira Proctor. I'm one of the co-chairs of this year's Reflections Projections Conference, and this is Kate Reisman, my co-chair. We're very excited to have you all here and very excited for this weekend, and we'd just like to take a moment to thank all the staff and volunteers who made this weekend possible.
Also in the realm of making this event possible, we'd like to lend a huge amount of gratitude to all of our corporate sponsors, everyone who you met at the job fair today, everyone who you're going to meet at the startup fair tomorrow, and we'd especially like to thank some of the sponsors who really went above and beyond, particularly Palantir, who's sponsoring MacMania, Microsoft, who's sponsoring T-shirts, Newstar, who's sponsoring dinner, which is going to be at 6:30 tonight, and Savo and Vertical Response for sponsoring the Puzzle Bang event, and Facebook and Adipar for sponsoring our program.
Without much more delay, it's my pleasure to welcome Garry Tan. Garry Tan has been in your shoes. As a naive computer science student at Stanford, he landed a spot at Microsoft's Windows Mobile pre-iPhone. He was an early employee who co-founded the engineering team for Palantir's financial product and designed Palantir's logo. He co-founded Posterous as part of Y Combinator's summer 2008 batch. Now he's a partner with Y Combinator, helping jumpstart tomorrow's world-changing startups. So I'd like you all to lend a round of applause to Garry Tan.
Thanks, guys. Do you think, is this working? Might be working. All right, great. Thank you guys so much for having me. It's such an honor to be here at Illinois, the home of so many great computer scientists. And for this talk, I tried to pull together the things that I wanted to kind of teach. If I could go back into time and I was 22 again, graduating, what would I want to know? What did I have to learn the hard way? And what can I help you avoid in the future? I was probably growing up a lot like you guys, into computers. I always knew this was definitely what I wanted to work on. There was just no question at all in my mind. And when I was a kid, I picked up the Yellow Pages, and I started calling in the internet section. I wanted to work. And so one of my first mentors that I met through one of these jobs, literally I got from calling around in the Yellow Pages, he took me under his wing and tried to help me understand, well, what is this business world that you're about to get yourself into? And the metaphor was, society as a whole out there, it's actually like this gigantic machine. And, this gigantic machine kind of needs you to have a label. It kind of needs you to have a role. And you see this out there, we're hiring a junior back-end engineer, right? And basically, as in this diagram has to point out specific parts and then label them so that they can be easily replaced. So does the machine want to give you a label. And what my mentor told me, which I will never forget and has always been the most useful piece of advice, is this. You don't want to be that little washer in this gigantic machine. You want to be this. This is a Wenger multi-tool. It's a real thing that you could buy. It's worth about $2,000 retail. It does everything. It's not really for your pocket, but if you would compare this to a pocket knife, you could probably buy a pocket knife for about $2, right? And it does one thing. But that thing, it does a whole lot more, and it's worth 3 orders of magnitude more. And we're talking about knives here. So what does that mean for a human being? Obviously, if you can do everything, then you will be more valuable. You will create more value in your lifetime. And concretely, that's what I see when I come out to events like this, or I'm talking to entrepreneurs, and they're saying, well, I'm a business person. I don't know how to code. And that's garbage. People need to learn everything. Like, I meet software engineers who don't want to learn how to create businesses. I meet designers who don't want to learn how to code, or hackers who don't want to learn how to design. All of these are labels. Really what you need to do to become this is actually open your mind to actually taking the time and learning these other trades, because you have to. If you do everything, then you'll be this. So, one of the really hard things to process, and I actually think it's a little sad, but very, very true, is that all human beings want to be a part of something that is going to take off without them. And nobody wants to sign up for something that's going to die without them. And so fundamentally, being a multi-tool means that everyone wants to be a part of your rocket ship. And what does that mean? It means you can acquire customers, co-founders, and employees, and capital. And that's the entire thing. If you want to create something, like it or not, that's what you need. And so, actually, there's two effects. Thus far, we've said you can acquire customers, acquire co-founders, and acquire capital easier if you're a multi-tool, if you don't need anything else. Then everyone else will want to come to you, right? But there's a secondary effect, and the secondary effect might be even more important, and that is that if you're evaluating co-founders or employees, how can you tell if someone is good at what they do if you don't understand what they're doing? And that is pretty key. So, went on my internships, had fun, went to Stanford and studied computer science, computer engineering specifically. And along the way, I became the president of one of the entrepreneurship societies there, which was really fun. I got to organize events, manage a budget, basically try to get people to do things for free and not be able to fire them, which is actually pretty hard to do, and I'm sure the organizers of any event would attest to, very difficult. But one of the hard lessons that I learned as a part of that is actually that, well, I was kind of tricking myself to a certain extent, right? I think that learning about entrepreneurship is awesome, and I think that you should definitely do it, but then do it to a point. Building is still the thing that's the most important, and so don't lose sight, right? And what that means is come to events like this, and later on, as you go on in your professional life, there's a big draw. Go to startup events, network, and things like that. One of the biggest things that we caution our founders to do is to don't mistake doing those things, networking and learning and all of that, for actually building, right? Actually building real software or real hardware that solves people's problems. And so I graduated, and I had the canonical kind of question, well, do I go to grad school or do I go to work? And I went to work. I worked on Microsoft ActiveSync. And thankfully all of this stuff is gone now and we all have iPhones. But one of the hardest lessons that I learned the hard way was, when you're graduating from college and you're starting on your career and you land one of these prestigious jobs at, Google or Facebook or Microsoft, you're going to get paid more money than you've probably ever had access to before. And the initial thing, the hardest thing, will be to resist running out. And I ran out and bought a brand new car. And then I got a nice apartment in the nicest part of town. And I went out every weekend. And you know what? That was really fun. And I don't really totally regret it. But at the same time, I knew I wanted to start a startup then. But I wasn't setting myself up for the right thing. If you know you need to start something, save that money, because money is not just... so if you're not going to start something, then it's cool, right? Treat money however you're going to treat it. But if you want to start a company, then what you need to do is treat money like capital. And capital is time. It's number of months that you can experiment, amount of time that you can actually just spend on not working for other people and working for your idea. So money is capital. The other thing that was kind of astonishing and continues to be true and will continue to be true is that this $650,000 is how much profit Microsoft made when I was there per employee. So if you take all the profits of that company and divide it by the number of employees, that's how much profit they were making. That's the value that you guys will create for these companies. And if you're working on the tech side, if you're building products, you're designing, you're writing the software, you got to believe that in a huge organization like that, it could be multi-million-dollar or more, also depending on what product you're working on. And so the lesson here is that work, like when you go out to work, this work is actually, it's a transaction. You're going to, in an organization, the people are the people, they're the ones who actually create all the value, right? The organization, in return, gives their employees a fraction of the value. But it's not like a bad deal. I mean, I'm not saying don't do this. I'm saying do this, but know why. The reason why people do it is two things: stability and a place to learn. And stability is super important. And it kind of links back with the previous point, right? Like, save money so that you can be stable even without having a job. And then a place to learn. And that's actually the really, really important part. You're going to go off, you're going to go to work at the greatest companies in the world, but if you're not learning, it's time to move on, because that's a pretty important part. So things were going really well at Microsoft, actually. And some of my friends, this was 2004, they called me up, and they were starting a company called Palantir. And they flew me down, and this was, everyone remembers the movie The Social Network, that moment where Peter Thiel whips out the checkbook in his office, and he writes that check, $500,000, and hands it over to Mark Zuckerberg. Well, for all I know, that very night, he went downstairs to his, this was Free Zone, his new restaurant that had just premiered, just opened in San Francisco, and he had dinner with me. My friends had managed to get Peter to sit down with me to try to spring me from Microsoft. And I was about a year in. I was a level 59 PM, bottom of the barrel. And Peter sits me down, and we're like this far, we're eating like some sort of concoction I don't even understand. And he says, "Gary, what are you doing at Microsoft? Really, come join us. We're going to change the world." And I should have waited until after the dinner to say no, because it was a very awkward conversation afterwards. And so, luckily, about a year later, my friends kept doing the startup, and they kept on going, and they didn't forget me. They kept working on me. And better late than never, I joined as employee number 10, and I helped co-found the finance side, which is awesome and super fun to work on. And you know what? That was one of the biggest mistakes I'd ever made. And if you spend any time in Silicon Valley, though, actually a lot of people make a lot of mistakes like that. And I spent a lot of time trying to figure out, like, well, why? Like, how did this happen? How did I make this huge mistake? And I realized that it was this. A lot of people talk about Peter Thiel actually as like the quintessential technology contrarian, right? But like, what does contrarian actually mean? Well, what it means is that you don't take for granted, or you just don't take wholesale what you see in the magazines, right? You don't take wholesale what you read in TechCrunch. You don't take wholesale what you hear to be hot, right? Like, that's not how it works, actually. It works in reverse. If you look at these things, actually what you're doing is basically relying on third-hand accounts of things about things that happened 6 months ago. And that was my mistake, actually. It was that I wasn't reading anything about government software. It seemed like enterprise was like not really the thing to do. Like all of these things I had read, I had been trained to believe from, more or less media. And so the truth of it is, all things that are really awesome will pass through a very difficult phase of people thinking it's really stupid. The iPod, when it first came out, it was Steve's reality distortion field, that he was going crazy. People couldn't believe that people would pay that much for a music player. Twitter, people thought it was the dumbest thing ever. I mean, there are probably people in this room now who still think it's the dumbest thing ever. And of course, Facebook, even in 2006, people didn't believe that anyone would be able to make money on it. And actually, this is a concept that Peter talked about when he came to speak at YC, and Paul Graham talked about again in his recent essay. It's that there is this weird sweet spot in between where there's this entire world of things that seem like a bad idea, but some sliver of them are actually good ideas. And so you don't want to actually do legitimately a bad idea. And the good ideas that everyone thinks are good ideas, they've got 10,000 people going after them. Heck, the big companies are probably already going after them. And so that's why it's odd and hard to think about these ideas. And I kind of want to link it to the point that we made earlier about customers, co-founders, and capital. So why? Why is it that when you read about startups, everything seems to be about the pitch? Why is that important? Well, the pitch has to be short, it has to be simple, and it has to contain no marketing bullshit. It's just necessary because that's the only way these crazy ideas that seem like bad ideas ever become real. Because you need to be able to sit down with a customer, with a potential co-founder or an employee, and especially with an investor, and within like 3 or 4 sentences of what you're saying, they need to get it, right? And that's kind of a problem. Most of our lives in like most academic capacities, what we look for is complexity, right? We want to appear smart. We want to look smart. That's actually not what's important at all. What's important here for your idea is to take this thing that sounds totally insane and to be able to breathe that into someone else and make them believe. And so in that way, your idea, which seems totally insane, becomes more and more real with every new person who signs on who believes. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. All right. So I learned a lot at Palantir, and then at a certain point I was ready to start on my own. And I applied to Y Combinator. We created Posterous. It was dead simple, easy blogging. But most people who we talked to said, wow, that's a little bit late. It's 2008, not 1998. And so one of the interesting parts of this is, why? Why were we able to create a blog platform so late? And I think the reason why it happened was because everything actually sucks. You can just sit down at your computer and in any given day, you're annoyed, you're stuck with really, really bad bugs. It's not all like the 80% case in most software works, but that last 20%, it's terrible, right? And the other thing is that means that there's an opportunity for you guys when you're trying to figure out what idea to go after. The most important thing is actually to seek a problem, something that people really like. This kludgy hack, right? How often in tech is there some sort of terrible, lame, kludgy hack like that barely works, right? Go after those things. Those things are where the Dropboxes and Airbnb are. And don't look at technology for technology on its own, right? You really do need to be able to find some clearly articulated problem that someone has and just actually go and solve that. And then finding that problem is not the only thing. You then actually have to ship. There are lots of people who identify really great problems to try to solve, and then they just never ship, and then it dies. At YC, what we say is you need to ship a quantum of product, so a discrete, indivisible thing that solves this problem. And for us, it was just this. It was just send an email, post at posterous.com, and then we email you back with a web page that has whatever you sent us in that email. And, it was a blog platform, but it didn't have basically anything that you would expect within a blog platform. It didn't have, comments. It didn't have being able to set privacy. It had no theming. It didn't even have a post editor on the web for about 6 months or a year. So that's what it means to ship something that's truly early. That gives you an opportunity. This was the month after we launched. We launched all of these features basically over the next month, and we kept doing that. Something about launching every single day or every other day, it gives your users this sense that their site is alive, it's changing, and that actually makes them want to use it even more. Another thing we learned that I don't think we would have, it would have been nothing. We would have never had any users if we didn't think this way, was that when you're small, you have to act small. You have to do totally unscalable things. This is what we did. We really laid out the welcome mat. So every single user who posted anything on the site, for the first 5,000 users, I clicked follow, and I wrote a customized, hello, welcome, here's my personal email address, let us know what we can do for you. And then I would comment about the thing they posted. If it was about flowers, it was about anything. I just wanted to let them know there's a human being, a real human being, who cares about that person and their experience. And there's one of the first studies into online community, actually on Usenet, before we even had the web. There are just profound effects when people don't feel like they're shouting into like this dark, deep cave and they don't hear anything back. Only 16% of people who post to a news group ever come back if they never get a reply. But 26%, 10% more, who get even one reply come back. And that doesn't seem like a lot. But it is a lot. Thanks to the compounding nature of just the growth curves of social software, that's the difference between a middling thing that kind of doesn't work and something that's really taking off like that rocket ship that we described. And the other thing is, you can be human. You can be a real person on the other end. I think that in most of our lives, the services that we interact with, the products we buy, they're just so corporate. They're so big. Like, you can't have a personal relationship. The most powerful moment, and the thing that I miss the most about running a startup right now, is the ability to get an email from a user and within 10 minutes track down that bug, fix the bug, roll the site, and reply to that user. Thanks for that bug report. I really appreciate it. By the way, it's fixed now. And so when you do that, and you do that every single day, you get not one follower, you get 10 followers, you get 100 followers, and those people go on and they tell everyone they know. And that's how these things work. I think there's a sense that when we're building social software, it's like we're building a car. It's really intense technology and all of that. But I don't think it's like that at all. I think actually it's like throwing a really, really awesome party. And so the second someone comes in, they got a place to throw their coat, someone hands them a drink and it's free. And by the way, here are all your friends, right? Like, that's what you should think about as you build whatever you make. Like, we're trying to make truly great experiences. That's how it works. All right, so Posterous was awesome, and YC is really, really fun. I guess a lot of people probably know what it is, but this is kind of the history of it. It was started. This is actually the first YC batch ever in 2005. It was started by Paul Graham over there on the right, and he literally wrote the book on Lisp. And out of that first batch, out came Reddit, one of the most beloved sites in the world, Looped, and Justin TV. And that was just the first YC batch. So Paul Graham and the partners decided, you know what, this is working pretty well, let's keep doing it. And since then, in about 14 more batches, we've funded about 450 startups, over 1,000 founders. And the most crazy thing, the thing that the Valley could not believe, is that Y Combinator is now spawning companies that are worth in the billions. And those are the companies that, to the Valley, there's only one or two of those that come out per year. And for them to come out of YC is an incredible, incredible thing. And working with these guys, one of the more astonishing things is that you read the Forbes magazine article, or you see like the cover or this or that, and you get this sense like founders must be like these ubermensch. They must be different from you or I, but they're not. I'll tell you right now. They just happen to go into the right things, and they happen to go about it the right way. So Y Combinator happens it's a 3-month program. It happens twice a year. You get about $18,000 for 7%, and lately, Start Fund has been coming in and giving everyone $150,000 on top of that, which is incredible. It's one of the best deals ever for early founders. What happens during the 3 months? One thing that really differentiates what we're doing than, say, Techstars or a lot of these other guys is that we just focus on two things: building software and getting users. And that's all it's about. And so the only formal thing that you have to show up for is dinners, actually. Dinners look like this. So you get to sit down with your other batchmates over dinner and talk about whatever's happening in your startup at that time. And the batchmates are actually really, really cool. They're some of the smartest hackers in the world. Simon was in the winter 2011 batch, and he created Django. Steve's one of our alums from that first batch. He comes back all the time. In fact, one of the key principles and one of the biggest reasons to do YC is the alumni network. Basically, out of those 1,000 founders, chances are what you're trying to do, someone in that 1,000 founders has tried to do, and they may have spent 10,000 hours on it already, too. And so one of the things about YC is when you're in the program, you get to draw upon any founder who has gone through the program, and they are basically honor-bound to help you. But in return, as you become an alum, you must do the same. And that's one of the most powerful things, and it helped us when we were doing our startup tremendously. And of course, the other partners are pretty amazing. This bald head over here is actually Paul Buchheit. He created Gmail, and to be able to have Paul talk to you about the way he thinks about consumer software, about how to delight users, that's unbelievable. And we also get pretty cool speakers, all of the names that you can imagine. And all of the talks are off the record, so you get to actually hear some stories that you wouldn't normally. The other part is office hours. There's a lot of crap that goes into doing a startup, and this is where we hear it the most, and we have to work through it with you guys. This is what it looks like. That's Paul sitting down with PickPlum alums from summer of last year. Literally anything that you have, we've probably seen some form of it, and hopefully we can help you through it, whether it's co-founder stuff, it's product stuff, marketing, raising money, design, hiring people, all of that. And finally, demo day. Most startups end up raising anywhere from a couple $100,000 up to $3 or $4 million these days. And pretty much every angel in VC in the Valley comes out to see it. Part of the reason why this is so powerful is it's actually really hard to raise money historically because of the, it's kind of like the stone soup problem. One of the two Moby guys, one of the alum companies told me about this idea. Back in the time of conscripted armies where basically militias would have to be fed by the people in a given area. Well, the people were smart. Like, nobody wanted to be the one guy who fed the whole army, right? And they would always have this problem, who's going to feed the army? Well, what the army decided to do was they said, well, come by the camp at 7 o'clock tonight. We're making stone soup. Oh, hey, you have some carrots? Stone soup is awesome with carrots. And they'd go to the next house. Hey, we're making stone soup. Come by the camp at 7 o'clock. Oh, you have cabbage. Bring cabbage. Stone soup is awesome with cabbage. And they'd go around. And then by the end, everyone would bring whatever they had, and everyone would have a meal together. And that's what you kind of have to do when you're raising money. Part of the overwhelming power of Demo Day is that you get this incredible market dynamic. Nobody wants to be the only person to help a startup. And so by talking to 100 investors all at the same time, well, everyone's pretty sure that they're not going to be the only ones to fund you. So what happens after? Actually, the same thing that happens during. Build product and get users. And so this is actually the fundamental lesson of YC, that actually these are the two things that matter. And these are the two things that you guys should be doing whether you're YC or not. So back in the day, back when I was in school, and even some point before, the only two options when you're graduating, you could go to grad school or you could go to work. And so hopefully now, with YC, we hope that you'll think about starting your startup. That's my talk. These are the lessons that I learned the hard way. So do everything. Don't be a scenester. Work is for learning. Be contrarian. When you're small, act small. Throw a good party. And YC is awesome. Come join us. You can email me anytime at Garry, Garry, at ycombinator.com. Thank you. Thanks for coming. Do you guys want to do questions or? All right, cool. Right there in the back.
So why Combinator have a formal application process?
So the question is, does Y Combinator have a formal application process? Yes, you can go to ycombinator.com right now. It's a online web form. And I believe the application deadline for January is actually October 30th. So it's coming up at the end of this month. Yes, sir.
When you started Posterous, what was the hardest thing that you tackled?
Okay, when starting Posterous, what was the hardest thing that we tackled? I think there were a lot of hard things. Scaling was pretty hard, actually. Ultimately, the hardest part is how do you find growth, right? That's something we actually kind of stumbled into. It turns out there are probably only 3 or 4 ways for any website to grow. One is the most obvious. You can buy it, and most startups can't afford to do that. Actually, that's not entirely true. If you make a product or service that you can charge for, usually one of the best ways to figure out how to get users is by buying the users. It might not necessarily be the first one I would recommend, but for a lot of businesses, that's actually really viable. If you can buy a user for more than how much money you can make off of them, you've got a business right off of there. The ways we ended up doing it were PR and stealing users from other platforms. And so PR, actually, this is a trick that you guys can use. What most startups do is they try to take all of their releases and all of the things that they've done, and they like roll them up into these monolithic like 2.0, 3.0 releases. And if you're Google or Microsoft, cool, you can do that. But if you're a startup, you can't afford to do that, because that might cause you to wait 6 months before you actually even communicate with your users, and that's way too long. You need to be communicating with your users every week, every other week. For a startup, you're not competing with like these other big guys. You're actually competing with obscurity. If people don't remember you, then you're dead, right? So the hack that we did for PR was every time we launched a feature, we tried to get press. And we didn't try to embargo it. That's like the fancy PR way of doing it, by going to a bunch of different publications and saying, hey, we have this news. The better way to do it actually is to go to one publication and just say, we want to give you the exclusive. And then the keywords to put in the email is, do you want it, yes or no? And they will always say yes. The other thing you got to do is go after the most junior writer who still has writing access to the blog. Because an article is an article. Like, no one cares who wrote it. And so put yourself in the shoes of these bloggers. Like, they have a job to do. They've got to put out articles on a weekly basis. And kind of the measure for them that they're going up in the world is that people recognize who they are and they give them stories. So you should do that. Let's see. So those are like the hardest lessons. Basically, how do you get users? And like, I think that tends to be the hardest lesson period for all startups. Like, how do you fight obscurity?
What startup do you most want to see in the world that doesn't exist?
You know what? You know how like in the Matrix you can like jack into a computer? I want that. Why hasn't anyone been working on that? I mean, it doesn't seem like there's a ton of research about it. But anyway, I think the world should probably, it would be pretty awesome, but I'm sure lots of people are pretty queasy about the idea too. I don't know. That's like my obscure thing that I'm kind of like researching right now. So go ahead.
So, I'm still a freshman, and I am interested in startups, but what should I be doing while I'm a student, like during school or during the summer?
During the summers, you should hack. During school, you should hack. You should, do well in classes and get to know like who the other good hackers are, the other guys who are building. School this time, like your undergraduate years are basically the most ripe time for meeting co-founders. It is harder than ever once you go out there. Like a lot of people expect, oh, I'll be able to meet people at work. Well, most people at work, maybe you don't want to co-found with them. The other thing is like, you kind of want people to have the same kind of culture that you do. One of the interesting things, if you talk to Max Levchin of PayPal, is that he discovered it's fairly important for the founders to kind of all come from the same place. Like you kind of want to think similarly. You don't want to have arguments about what stack to use or whatnot. And so, he's from here, and he loves working with other teams of people from Urbana, right? So, yeah, look for co-founders, hack, build stuff. Do well in school. I mean, it definitely helps. Over here?
So in the slide you had, okay, you go to graduate school, go work for a big company, but now there's this go the Y Combinator to start a startup.
Yeah.
I guess one of my reservations is what happens to people who fail, and do you still gain things out of it that will help you in your career, or is it?
All right. So the question is, what happens when you fail at your startup? Do you still get anything out of it? Well, the way the Valley is working right now, yeah, you usually get $1 million or $2 million out of it. So what happens when startups fail? Typically, if you've raised an angel round, your angels will help you try and find a soft landing, as they say, if it really doesn't work out. But you guys are a good, talented team. The going rate is anywhere from $500,000 to a couple $1 million per engineer, depending. So that's pretty good. And even if that doesn't happen, honestly, the job market is totally insane. And when I was running a startup, I always preferred to hire people who had done startups before because it takes a certain mindset. You have to be so independent about it. You actually have to be totally a self-starter. There are people who say they're interested in startups, but the way I know if they really are is if they actually put their career on the line and they go out and do it. I actually think that there's never been less risk to start a startup today.
So if you rewind the clock back to that conversation you had with Peter Thiel,
yeah.
Is there anything he could have said that would have convinced you?
Okay, so the question was, when I said no to Peter Thiel and made the biggest mistake of my life, is there anything that Peter could have said to convince me? So that was the problem, actually. By all rational accounts, I should have said yes. I knew I wanted to do startups. I knew Peter Thiel was a total badass. They were with my friends, my friends who I went to school with. I took classes with them. One of them, we'd been one of my oldest friends in the world, right? So it was totally ideal conditions. Literally, I think they said everything they possibly could say. And at the end of the day, it was me who made the wrong decision. Yep.
Two questions. Why did you decide to join Y Combinator, and what's it like to work with Paul Graham?
Okay. Why did I leave? Why did I decide to join Y Combinator? Let's see. Well, this is being taped, so I'll just say that I got a little bit burnt out, and then I let all of our investors know that I was stepping away, and Paul Graham said, you know what, we're looking for someone to help out with the startup, so come on board. Working with PG is awesome. He's, every bit as eloquent and intelligent in person. So I think it's a privilege. It's amazing. Yes, sir.
So startups seem like a really hectic, fast-paced job.
Yep.
How do you deal with burnout and just going through that kind of workload every day?
Yeah, so startups are a lot of work. How do you deal with burnout? Well, when you're starting, it really is it really ends up being pretty much all of your waking hours. I basically remember coding for about 20 hours and then sleeping for 8, and then just going around the cycle. And this is just by necessity. That's what you need to do. But later on, like, you can only really sustain that kind of thing for maybe 3 to 6 months. After that, you kind of have to chill out a little bit. So really what you need to do after a certain point is once you feel like the thing has legs, you got to take it a little bit easier, right? Like, it means maybe you work only 70 hours a week instead of most of your waking hours. There is a steady state that you can work at. And part of the real fun of it is that the hours actually pass really fast if you're doing what you really enjoy. For me, building software is what I really enjoy. And when I'm spending 70 hours, you know what? It passes in an instant. Psychologists have a term for it, and it's flow. And I think that many of the founders who really do well, they spend a lot of their time in that. So it doesn't feel that bad. Yep.
So YC has like a low single-digit acceptance rate for companies that apply. Do you think it's worth it for startups to apply to other incubators if they can't get into Y Combinator, or do you think that's just not worth it?
All right. Well, YC has a low single-digit acceptance rate. Should you apply to other incubators? That's a tough question for me because I'm so biased. There are probably quite a few incubators that are pretty good. The measure for them, I would say, is look at the people who are running the incubators. What have they done? Have they built software? Have they built things that you like? And if the answer is yes, then I would consider it. But be careful, because there are a lot of incubators out there made by people who have never built software before, who have never built businesses before. Yeah, just like those aren't the ones that you want to be a part of. Yep.
Kind of going off of that, I was curious what you thought about market or niche-specific incubators.
Okay, question is market or niche-specific. Shoot. I guess I haven't thought about it. I think like there are probably some that could help, but I guess I don't know enough about it to say one way or another. In the front.
What's your stance on single founders?
What's the stance on single founders? We've been funding quite a few single founders. I think it's a situation where you kind of have to be more excellent at everything else. I wouldn't say definitely no, but it's harder. Everything else about what you're doing, whether it's the idea, the traction, it just has to be better. One of the big problems with single founders is related to the idea problem. It's hard to know what is a good idea. Lots of things seem like bad ideas. And it kind of goes to the pitch and recruiting too. This is why getting other co-founders involved is important. Because all of you guys are really talented, you're really smart, you're going to go out, you know a lot of people who are also really talented and really smart. And part of the problem is, if you can't get your crazy idea into the head of someone else who you grew up with, who you trust implicitly, and they trust you implicitly, both of you are extremely talented, and you can't get one other person to come along with you, that might be the line between crazy and smart, right? Brilliant. And so that's why it's so hard to be a single founder. It might be that the idea that people pursue is crazy, but that also means that you should work really hard to talk to the people you trust who are closest to you, who you know are brilliant, that you have a close relationship with, and get them to come on with you. Yep.
So I know startups are obviously associated with taking on a lot of risk. Do you ever think, I mean, especially as students coming out, it might maybe be riskier for us financially, especially if we have loans and things like that? I mean, do you think it's stupid to kind of play kind of that gambling game? Maybe you could possibly put yourself in debt? Or do you think no matter what, you can manage it, or you should just do it anyway?
Yeah, so the question is, should you worry about the cost to doing a startup? And is it worth it, right? Kind of. financially, that's part of the reason why what you should do is get enough cushion for yourself such that you can work independently. I mean, it's infinitely cheap to like survive on ramen. So save some money. Like, I wouldn't do it if I had zero money in the bank. I would do it if I, felt like I could work on an idea for like at least 6 months sustained, like get something to market and do it with my friends. And if you think about it, like how much money is that? Probably less than $20,000. You can always do it yourself. Doing things like YC or bringing on investors or doing a friends and family round, that's also a way to do it. You probably shouldn't have to go into such major debt, but sometimes it's a part of it. The Airbnb guys actually worked on their startup idea for 2 years before they saw any sort of progress. And about like a year and a half in, Joe Gebbia had, how some people collect baseball cards and they keep it in a binder? He collected maxed out credit cards and they kept it in a binder. They ended up digging themselves out of that debt by selling cereal boxes, but that's a different story. So yeah, I mean, don't do anything stupid. I think that if you're a good hacker, whether you get a soft landing or not, like there are companies out in the valley that are starving for what you need, what you want, what you have inherently, right? And doing a startup is one of the best ways to prove that. So yeah, I wouldn't sacrifice health or like go too much into debt. But again, I think that for good hackers, like there's just not too much to lose, actually. Yep.
If you release a product that doesn't gain that much traction initially, how do you know whether you should move on or if you should keep working on it?
Okay, so if you release your product and it doesn't get traction immediately, how do you know if you should change it or move on? Isn't it? I think Twain said, if at first you don't succeed, try again, then quit. It's no use being a goddamn fool about it, right? So I think that's generally what you need to do, right? Try to figure out what's happening, and actually talking to users is the best way you can do that, right? If you don't have any users, and that might be the problem, like just go to a coffee shop and buy a bunch of Starbucks gift cards and be like, hey, can I buy you can I give you this gift card? Will you spend like 10 minutes with me? And just watch them use the software. Like ask them questions that are open-ended, right? Like, what do you think this website does? Do you have that problem? And then ask them to do things, right? Like, what would you expect this button to do? Basically, getting more data is the way that you find out what you should do next. Ari?
How well do you think the incubator model works for sort of bigger technical problems, like Palantir, for example, where you need to be heads down for a long time, and it's actually hard to acquire users, but there's a big payoff at the end.
Yeah, so incubators, and what about like really, really, really big tech challenges like Palantir? It can be tough. Might want to talk to Founders Fund at that level, right? There are VCs out there that have the appetite for it, right? And so, incubators might be it. It might be the right thing. It might not. For things like Palantir, it just requires a lot of capital. But there's capital out there, and people like to take big bets on big technology. So the number one thing to do there is try to get as much traction as possible, like whether it's just understanding the market or building early versions of it. I mean, at Palantir, what we were doing is literally making Flash versions of the software in order to seed, like to do customer development, right? And so doing things like that. So yeah, I mean, I think incubators can still help, but for the really, really big capital plays, like there are investors out there for it.
What's the most commonly asked question at office hours?
What's the most commonly asked question at office hours? Probably, how do I hire? Sadly, the second or third probably is, how do I fire my co-founder? Which is, you should take that as a warning, right? Like who you start your company with is really, really important. In the last few YC batches, for instance, about 1 in 5 of the companies, had some sort of co-founder dispute and or like letting go, right? So it's common. Be careful, and that's why we say like go work with the people who you trust, who you've grown up with, who you know really well. And that's why working with people in college is like the best way to truly get to know people. So make sure you take advantage of that while you're here. Over here?
So how do you fire a co-founder?
How do you fire a co-founder? Talk to a lawyer. Yeah. Oh, actually, like a practical point in that matter. As you figure out, if you're like starting a team and you're trying to figure out all of that, make sure you have vesting. So probably that might be the first time a lot of you have heard of that term. Vesting means you get the stock after a certain number of months or years that you've been working with the company. The typical vesting schedule is over 4 years, and they have what they call a 1-year cliff. So if anyone quits before the 1 year is up, you don't get anything. But that's really important among co-founders because it's like insane when people split up the company, say 3 ways, and then there's no vesting, and then someone has a fight. Like, what happens? One of the co-founders leaves with 33% of the company. That can kill a company. And so think about it. Like, I would never, ever start a company without vesting. I think I saw over here earlier.
How do you feel about websites like Kickstarter?
All right, websites like Kickstarter. I think they're awesome. I mean, YC-funded companies have been using it, and if you're doing anything that requires hardware, like it's a no-brainer. Pebble raised pre-sold $10 million. It's not a raise. It's like real revenue, right? One of my favorites, the Boosted board, just raised $500,000 for their electric skateboard in a matter of 2 weeks, 3 weeks. It's crazy. I think it's awesome. I think I saw over here. Sorry. Actually, yeah, let's do that.
How do you answer the first question? How do you figure out who to hire?
Who to hire? How do you answer that? I guess for your startup or? Yeah, okay. Go after your friends, really. That's what we did at Palantir. Yeah, Ari's nodding. That's what we did. We made everyone make lists of all the smartest possible people, and then we tallied them up, and then whoever got the most number of this person is the most smart, we would basically like sit on their doorstep and like try to get them, right? Yeah, exactly. It's important. You should go after the people you know. I think there's this sense out there that you can, post a job listing and the universe will deliver some great hacker on your doorstep or someone who's awesome. And that rarely ever works. Like almost, basically the point at which you need to start really relying on people you don't know, that's going to be way in the future. Hire number 50, hire number 100, or even beyond that if you're doing well, right? I think, yeah.
I was wondering what you thought about, or how you thought equity should be split up. Because some people like to do all even, and other people like to do this.
All right, how should equity be split up? What tends to work is something that's about, like if you're just starting out and there's not a line of code, it should be pretty equal, right? You should know who the leader is, though. It's pretty important to know who the CEO will be, and it's usually better to figure it. Like, the mistake is saying, "Well, we'll figure it out later," right? That can cause a lot of problems later. So, you probably want like some person who's going to be like ass on the line, but then beyond that, everyone should be pretty equal up front. Even if like someone's written 1,000 lines of code or something like that, right? Like the life of your company when you're starting out, when you're forming the team, like there's going to be, like that's 1,000 lines, but over the life of it, you might write like millions of lines of code, right? So that 1,000 lines doesn't mean a whole lot. A lot of it's going to be in the execution that continues, and you're going to want everyone bought in as much as possible for the life of it. Over here?
Is it a good idea to figure out legal stuff like patents and whatnot early on, or is it a good idea to kind of just go with it and then figure out that stuff later?
Okay, so the question is patents. In general, focus on getting to market. Patents are really expensive. I mean, I'm sure there are cases where like you probably should think about it, but generally no. Like, just focus on getting the market, right? Yep.
But I can think of some instances where that would be a problem. Like Groupon had this generic idea to give out like these group coupons, but then it was so easy to copy the idea that pretty much every other player started doing that. So how would you deal with this idea that's that easily stealable?
That's fair, but it's unclear that Groupon would be able to enforce like that kind of patent anyway. In general, when you're that, like maybe for Groupon it would have made sense, right? But for 99% of people starting out, the only thing you should focus on is building software and getting users. You know what's not on that list? Getting patents. Yep.
Is there a comfortable ratio between the actual building process and getting users and the formalities of business or a business plan? Is that going to take a back seat?